What if some of philosophy's biggest, deepest questions, the ones we've been wrestling with for centuries, weren't just hard to answer, but were actually meaningless? Today, we're diving into the story of a philosopher who basically tried to pull the plug on entire fields of debate, all by asking if we were even asking the right questions to begin with.
Let's start with the classic. Are numbers real? I mean, do they exist out there in the cosmos somewhere, just like planets or atoms? Or are they just useful fictions we've cooked up in our heads? This is the exact kind of question that philosophers have spilled oceans of ink over.
And this whole field of study, this grand quest to figure out what is and what isn't, has a name. It's called ontology.
Yeah, so ontology is all about creating the ultimate inventory of the universe. It asks, what are the fundamental building blocks of reality? What truly actually exists? Pretty heavy stuff.
But then, in the 20th century, a thinker comes along with this absolutely radical idea. He looked at a question like, are numbers real? And suggested that maybe, just maybe, the real problem wasn't finding the answer, but the question itself.
And that philosopher was Rudolf Carnap. His big diagnosis was that philosophy had gotten tangled up in these impossible riddles because it had completely misunderstood the most basic tool it was using, language.
See, for Carnap, philosophy's role wasn't to sit in an armchair and ponder the ultimate nature of reality. No, he thought it should be a practical partner to science, helping to sharpen its concepts and build better, clearer tools for discovery.
And this brings us right to his central idea, the tool he used to do all this, the framework. A framework for Carnap is basically a formal language, a system with very precise rules, like mathematics. And here's the kicker, we don't choose a framework because it's true. We choose it because it's useful.
It's kind of like the rules of chess. The rules define what a bishop is, what a pawn is, and what they're allowed to do. We accept those rules not because they represent some deep cosmic truth about bishops, but because, well, without them, you can't play the game of chess.
And this whole idea of a framework, of playing a kind of language game, led Carnap to what is probably his most revolutionary idea. He said there are two totally different types of questions you can ask.
Okay, so this is where it all comes together. On the one hand, you've got internal questions. These are questions you ask inside the game. So if we adopt the framework of mathematics, asking, are there prime numbers, is easy. Yes, of course there are. The answer is trivially true according to the rules. But then you have the external questions. These are the big philosophical ones that try to step outside the game and ask, yeah, but does this whole system of numbers, does it actually connect to reality?
And here's the punchline. For Carnap, those huge external questions are literally meaningless. He called them pseudo-problems. Why? Because words like number or exist only have meaning within a specific language game. Asking if numbers really exist outside the framework of math is like asking if a rook really exists off the chessboard. The question itself is just broken.
So if you can't ask if a framework is real, how on earth do you choose one? Well, Carnap's answer was all about pragmatism. It had zero to do with metaphysics.
His method is actually pretty simple. First, you propose a formal language, say the language of modern physics. Second, you see how useful it is. Does it help scientists make good predictions? Does it help us organize what we know about the world? If the answer is yes, then great. You adopt it as a practical tool. And then you can get to work answering all the internal questions you could ever want. It's a practical choice, not a deep statement about reality.
And this gets us to Carnap's ultimate goal. He wasn't trying to solve the ancient problems of ontology. He was trying to dissolve them, to make them vanish.
By reframing the whole thing as a practical choice between different languages, Carnap could say that these supposedly deep questions about what's really real, they aren't deep at all. They're just a symptom of linguistic confusion. They come from trying to ask a question before you've even agreed on the rules of the game that would give it meaning.
Now you can probably guess that this idea didn't sit well with everyone. It sparked one of the biggest philosophical showdowns of the 20th century, with another brilliant mind, W.V.O. Quine. So Quine just wasn't buying Carnap's clean, sharp line between choosing a framework and asking questions inside it. For Quine, it's all just one big, messy web of belief. Our scientific theories and what we think exist are all tangled up together. For him, you figure out what's real by looking at what our best scientific theories need to assume exist in order to work. There's no neat separation.
But even with powerful critiques like Quine's, Carnap's big idea never really went away. His challenge left a permanent mark on philosophy, forcing people to really think about what they were doing. So let's wrap this up.
Carnap's big play was to use the idea of formal languages, these frameworks, to take apart traditional ontology. He said those big questions about reality are just meaningless external questions, or pseudo-problems. The only questions that make sense are the internal ones, and their answers are usually pretty obvious once you pick a framework. And the choice of which framework to use, that's purely a practical decision for getting science done. It totally reframes the entire purpose of philosophy.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question of our own. Is the point of philosophy to finally answer those ancient, profound questions about existence? Or is its real power in showing us which of those questions were maybe built on a misunderstanding from the very beginning?